Hi there, and welcome to this month's Chai with Viji. My name is Viji, and I am an Ayurvedic birth expert and the founder of a small healthcare practice called Divine Journey. Every first Sunday of every month, I host a Chai with Viji where I discuss various topics that are of relevance and importance to our lives. And I wanted to share with you that the next 3 months, January, February, and March, are going to be somewhat of a series called The Cyclical Woman. And for this month's Chai with the Viji, our topic is the truth of the bleed. I start every one of my talks with this slide on the 5 pillars of healing of Divine Journey. And this is because it is so incredibly important to me to provide a framework from which people can understand themselves and implement support and change their lives. So it all begins, first of all, with self-awareness, understanding who we are and observing who we are without judgment. Then we must understand the context in which we live and also the context in which we are influenced by. What are the internal and external factors that provide us an environment that we have to interact with that affects us? From there, it is so important to be able to utilize knowledge and resources so that we can understand ourselves better. And then we use that knowledge and resource to support ourselves. And that supporting comes from integrating what we know with who we are. And I am going to mirror this talk with that same pillar energy. So one of the things that's very, very important is that we often think of the bleed as an isolated incident, but truly the menstrual cycle is a visible reflection of a much larger and interconnected process that is about balance, is about flow, and is about energetics. And it's happening not in isolation, but within the entire body in connection with every organ system that is within us. So let's go to the first section. And this first section is about self-awareness and how we can begin to, recognize the patterns that exist within. And this is specifically related to our bleed, and use it as information to understand ourselves better and create that awareness of the self. One of the most important things that I want all of us to walk away from today is the fact that the menstrual cycle isn't actually an independent cycle. And most of us think about the menstrual cycle only related to fertility. The fact that either we want to get pregnant, and this is something that's part of that process. And the really, really important message here is that our menstrual cycles, our bleed, is really a mirror and a reflection into the existence of balance, flow, nourishment, and all of the energetics that are happening in our body, the whole body. And so this is something I think very important for us to focus on and to think about and to keep in our mind as we go through today's talk, but also as we experience our bleed every month. And right now, I want to begin this process by calling all of us to really begin to observe what happens in our own body, to understand ourselves. So in order to be able to do that, we want to look at the signals that the body provides. So when we look at the signals related to our bleed, there are many aspects to this. And depending sometimes whether we have issues or not, we focus on, one thing over another. But I ask us to actually really hone in and think about all of them. So let's quickly go over them. So cycle length, that is the distance, or not the distance rather, but the timing between one bleed and then the next bleed. The bleed length, how long do we actually bleed for? And do we see a pattern of scanty flow, what we may or may not consider normal flow or extremely heavy flow, right? The color of the blood, is it dark? Is it light? Is it bright? Is it dull? And does it smell? So all of these things, even up to now, requires us, not just to go into the restroom, clean ourselves up, and then move on, change a pad, but to really take a look as to what's happening. Paying attention to whether, for example, we see clots, whether we see mucus, how over not just on the bleed, but both the bleed and the month, how do we feel in terms of our energy levels? How do they change as we're beginning our bleed, as we're ending our bleed, in the middle of our bleed? Do we experience pain? And what is really the emotional landscape that we experience? How are we affected by the things around us? So I want us to kind of keep the perspective that all of these things are not about having an A or an F on a report card, but rather to understand what these factors, what these signals actually tell us about what's going on in the rest of our body. Because once we kind of understand that, then if needed, we can troubleshoot. And I want to share this. This is not something that we want to just pay attention to because we have a goal, like, either something is wrong and we want to try to fix it, or we want to get pregnant, and also even, as we kind of taper off in our menstrual cycles, we want to understand all of these aspects because it gives us insight into what's going on in our body. I know for myself, many years into my own, reproductive years, that I did not pay attention to all of it, right? I would pay attention to some of it. In other times, it would be people around me who, there's a lot of joking around, going around about, oh, are you on your period? And that's because people see the shifts. But there is such a powerful thing that we're going to discuss about how all of these things actually really represent all the other organ systems in our body and how they are functioning and how they're supporting ourselves or how they're not supporting us. And so I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts around this and whether you have actually paid attention to it, not because something is wrong, but just in general.
No, I think I always looked at it as an inconvenience, right? And I always looked at it like, why is this happening? Oh my God, it's so debilitating. Of course, like in different phases of life and different different ages, I think there were different indicators here, which I didn't. And I don't think anyone ever taught you to be curious about it or find out like what it is. So I think, like you said, right, maybe going forward and also for our kids, right, like at least like try to make sure that they have some knowledge about it and they can be curious about it and they can approach it in a different way. So maybe that.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing, because I think this is really, really common. And it's really only when we stop and take a look. And I hope that by the end of today, we all actually do realize, because we're just started. But, we see it as an inconvenience. Why? I think it's because we generally don't understand, what it actually means. It's just something that maybe society has made us do different things, or we experience, either pain or tiredness or mood shifts, things like that. And it causes us an inconvenience in that way. And again, what I want to bring us back to is that all of those things that maybe we have experienced that caused us inconvenience, or other people or other times where we haven't experienced anything at all, these are all signals as to what's going on. And those signals give us the power and the agency to be able to make change. So if I do experience pain 1 month, or I do experience different symptomology, the question next should always be, what can I do, or why is it happening, and what can I do to support myself, right? It's not even an academic, before you have kids, you're not thinking about the future, but how can I create a better experience and life for myself? So thanks so much for sharing. So the next thing that I, wanted to share is that once we observe the bleed, the next question really becomes, so things are going on. What is it responding to? So that's where we try to understand what influences it. And then therefore the next step would be, how can we influence that? And one of the biggest things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that the menstrual cycle doesn't just exist in a silo in its own timeline. It's really about, like I said, what's going on in the body. And so I love this next visualization. There's a lot of pictures here, a lot of, different words going on. And I think that philosophically, and in that, I dare I use the word woo, kind of arena, there's a lot of things about how, we sync up with the moon cycles and sync up with the universe. Even in Ayurveda, we always talk about how ill health comes from disconnecting from nature. And those are just words until you understand why. So I don't want to, there's a lot, there's like, 13 or 14 different things here, but we are actually very much related to both the external cycles outside of us and the varied internal cycles, few of which I have mentioned that are internal to us. And it's really important for us to understand. So I want to kind of, I just want to explain, because it will highlight the importance of why that tenet of Ayurveda is very important, and how we must be aware of both the other or all the internal cycles as well as the external, because they all coexist in this interdependent system. So there's a cycle described by the word I knew how it was pronounced, Ultradian, right? And so the Ultradian cycle in our body basically is the type of cycle where it's defined by time. So anything in the body that has a time limit of, let's say, they're like shorter cycles. So like 90 minutes, 1.5, so that's 1.5 hours, 120, to up to 2 hours. It comes in cycles. So if you think about a sine wave where it comes in pulses, it increases in intensity, has a peak, goes down, and then goes away for a little bit. And then again, it comes, it peaks, it decreases, and it goes away. And, if any of you have had children, and even if you haven't, you've seen on TV, this really mirrors contractions during labor, right? And the most beautiful thing about these ultradian rhythms is that there's a particular phenotype to them. Like I said, it comes, it peaks, it decreases, and then it goes away. So let's focus on that. Now, so these cycles could be like, it could actually be related to digestion. Like when we're hungry, the body secretes, enzymes that and hormones that tell us that we're hungry, or even for like hormonal releases. This is one of the types of rhythms that exist. Let's say, for example, that we ignore, these impulses that come and go, and we're like, I'm just going to push through it. So I'm not going to give my body the rest, that in between. Think about having labor with absolutely no rest in between contractions. I will tell you right now, even as an observer, that would be hell. And what then happens? Our bodies are not able to take it, our bodies shut down, and then things go awry. A lot of times when women do have these kind of continuous contractions in labor, the uterus gets tired, and then this is where birth plans go out the window, because then interventions come to normalize the system. And what is that normalization? That contractions come and contractions go, and that rhythm occurs continuously. So I want to share then how you can see macrocosm or microcosm to macrocosm, how these rhythms affect. But let me bring us back. So when we have, for example, disruptions, and those disruptions can be just ignoring that cycle, right? Of, hey, like I have an intense, I'm preparing for a presentation, I'm going to work hard, but then I'm going to take it easy and rest, so that when I do my presentation, I'm going to be able to be on top of my game again, and then again rest. So if we don't do that, then the body will shut down, and these like hormonal cycles and other things will get dysregulated. another cycle is actually, let me pause. Did that make sense? Because this is for me one of the most, I mean, just one of the most powerful examples of how, a rhythm outside of, menses, right? Or even like, a rhythm outside of that impacts how our hormones function and therefore then how our periods are experienced. Does that make sense? So, so then, I'll go through a couple of them, but the circadian rhythm, as we all know, it's about being able to recognize, light and dark, then night and day. And one very important thing actually is that, and I never knew this, that melatonin is actually responsive to light. And so when there is, for example, when we, shift workers who don't sleep at night, that like not responding to that internal cycle, of night and day and what we're supposed to do during those particular times is going to disrupt our bodily functioning. Right. Then the monthly cycles, what happens, during that. So we go through this process later. Next month, we'll talk about the different phases of our cycle, right? The menstruation, then the follicular phase, luteal phase, all these different phases of our cycle that take about a month. We need to be able to understand that and respect that. And so as you kind of look through these images, you'll see that these are many of the internal cycles that basically support us. So all of these different cycles, including the external ones, have qualities. All of the chai with Vijis we've done so far have talked about, like the different energetic forces in the body, the qualities that they exhibit, that they have, and how those qualities impact us. Same. So we go back to the fact that all of these cycles have their qualities, and we need to be able to understand what they are and how they impact us. If it's cold outside, how is it going to impact our body? If we don't, if we eat with the sun, for example, how is that going to affect our and impact our digestive system? So this is just really important, and it just shows that again, all of our organ systems work together. They're not independent.
Why do you have the seasonal thing as an internal and external?
When I refer to seasonal in the internal, thanks so much for asking. This is related to our own seasons of life, and as a woman, we have the reproductive years, we have the transition years from, during perimenopause when our cycles begin to shift. And then in the later half of our life, when we are in menopause, these are the seasons I'm referring to there. Then when we have seasons, when I refer to them external seasons, they are related to, the summer, the winter, the fall, the environment outside.
And the infradian one, what is that?
Ultradian, circadian, and infradian are usually defined by time. So we have the ultradian that is a shorter, like less than a day. So it's like shorter intervals, right? And many of our biological processes actually work on that. These kind of, the body is releasing, certain chemicals in certain intervals that cause certain things to happen. And then the body then, kind of goes into a retreat mode. So that's the ultradian. Then the circadian is more of like a 24-hour, time frame. And then the infradian is more of that kind of greater, like monthly kind of cycle. Okay. So again, the bottom line, again, worth really emphasizing is that these cycles, all of them influence each other. When practitioners actually go back to this fundamental aspect, it is because these fundamental aspects is what governs everything. So again, we don't live in a silo. Our bodies do not operate on a silo. And so when we are in sync with both internal and external, it's just basically like understanding your environment and making sure that everything is in symbiotic balance with each other. In this way, that all of these different factors that will also impart their own qualities, life, stress, food, emotions, and rhythms, including the nervous system, will impact us. So this is why it's so important. I wanted to show this because this very much will reflect in how we experience our periods. And the bleed is that amazing, beautiful mirror. So I really want to shift from nuisance and inconvenience to mirror. Our menstrual cycles don't just operate because somehow we just, our uterine lining starts to build and then it decreases. These happen because of signals that exist in the brain. And so we have the brain, the hypothalamus, which secretes, gonadotropin releasing hormone. And then that signals the pituitary gland also in the brain. That signals the ovaries, and then that signals the uterus. And so there's this like continuous cycle, and you'll see this arrow that's going up. There's this continuous cycle, feedback mechanism. And so every part of our body actually talks to other parts of our body. And so I'm just showing this because, we hear a lot about the HPO axis, HPA axis, but these are all to share that, again, there's a conversation going on in our body. We need to know what it is. And I would say 90% of the time we don't. I hope you see now the thread, though. The first part, again, is to understand what's going on with us without judgment and without even trying to analyze it. The second part really is to understand, the context in which we live in, what's affecting us, what's going on day to day, right? Later on, I'm going to talk about a few examples of people who have come to me, with issues either related to their bleed or otherwise. And oftentimes, when they've tried everything, they're like, but things aren't changing. And so it's really important for us to widen our net and be able to understand that context, because that really is going to be the source of direction, in terms of like, how do we change our foods? How do we change our lifestyles? How do we change, the things that we do? And how do we also incorporate herbs and herbal formulations also into our life? So this is a part where I want to talk about the wisdom, because now that we understand, or that we're aware of what we're going through, we're aware that we hopefully are aware of what is influencing us, or we can always, kind of ask ourselves that question. The next part is, let's understand what is normal, what's going on, and so then we can start to integrate slowly all of these pieces together. The uterus, our focus always is on reproduction, but the uterus is well more than reproduction. So the first thing that I wanted to share is that you would be surprised, but the uterus is very much a hormonal communicator, an organ that communicates or that facilitates communication between hormones and the brain. And we, often think about it as just, something that's independent of that. But it does help to coordinate, right, between the brain and the hormones into the uterus on what it needs to do at different stages of when our body needs to do different things, whether it be house a baby or not. And so again, the brain, like we talked about in the last slide, signals, through the release of hormones, and then the uterus responds to those signals, and it either builds the uterine lining, holds the uterine lining, or then releases that uterine lining. What this means is that it gives us an insight into how well our nervous system is working, how well, the hormonal or endocrine system is working, and also how then our reproductive organs are working in conjunction with those. So whenever we have a bleed, your nervous system, your endocrine system, and your reproductive system are all working together. If something's awry, then it's, everyone just looks at the reproductive system, but it could be upstream. So the uterus is also reflective of nourishment and preparation. Basically, obviously, is preparing that internal environment for a potential baby, and therefore it thickens, it's held, and this is all done with the nervous system input. But now, if we have regular and normal cycles, and that our uterine lining is well built, it really reflects how well our body overall is nourished. It reflects the quality of blood that we have in the body as a whole. And it also reflects how our body is able to create these tissues, which reflects metabolism. Later on, we will talk about how in Ayurveda, we understand how these tissues are formed, and then things will be a little bit clear as to why the uterus and its function is actually reflective of nourishment, blood supply, and metabolic activity. So the next thing is it's involved in rhythmic building and holding. We have to maintain these tissues. It's a process, again, facilitated by hormones. But remember when I just mentioned those rhythms, the infradian, the circadian, the ultradian, all of these things, right? For it to be properly functioning, if we don't have these timings right, then we understand that something is off. And so that will absolutely be important when we want to troubleshoot. Okay. The fascinating thing about this is, inflammation is always seen as a really, really bad word. But the reproductive system, uses this, our bleeds as a intentional inflammatory experience, right? And so it's only when it goes wrong when it is bad. I don't know if you knew, but of course, inflammation is related to the immune response. And so the reproductive system is using the immune system to build, these tissues, right? So we have an increase in blood, things and tissue, things like that. So there's what we would call an inflammatory response, and this is done again, by communication that happens in the body, but we will understand whether these signals and whether this inflammation is normal or whether it's excessive and putting a load on the body by how we experience our cycles. So, everything that we talked about as a potential nuisance, this might be indicative of something that's not going correctly, not going in sync with the other cycles in our body. And finally, this is so important because the body has such a mechanism that when it no longer needs something, it's able to release it. And, I've had clients where they are in constant release. So that means there's bleeding every single day. There's, and then I have people who don't get their periods. And so this is some kind of defect in this system. And so it's important to really understand. So definitely there is a release mechanism in the downward direction related to our cycles. And again, most everything you'll see, especially from a Western perspective, is going to be about hormonal cycles and hormonal fluctuations in the body. But the focus here on this part is that if our bodies are in sync with being able to hold something and then let it go, we will have a healthy period. And so then the question, becomes, when are we holding on to things? When are we able to let it go? If those of you attended a previous Chai with Viji about, the weight that holds us, or this is very important because it's not just, the impact of us holding on to an emotion, us holding on to a thought may actually influence the body holding on to something that it no longer needs. It's such an intelligent, amazing system that has so many functionalities. And each one of these things, when you look at, has such a profound effect on our body. And then we are then able to kind of expand it outward to see what we do, what we think, what we feel, how are those same qualities of holding, of releasing, of building, how do they happen in our body, in our mind, in our everyday existence that can actually impact our cycles? Bringing it all back is a reflection of the whole body, not just the reproductive system. It's very much tied to obviously hormones, but also, and this is the endocrine system, but also related to what we experience, our immunity, our digestive system, every organ system in the body. And then finally, our bleed responds to these different signals. And it's very important to understand that. Okay, now from a Western medical perspective, very quickly, it's always, we always think about hormones and what's going on hormonally. So we talked about earlier, so there's the presence of estrogen, okay, and that's what builds up the uterine lining. Then we have progesterone, and that's what maintains it, which is obviously, very important, and especially when we have a baby to nourish. And so when implantation doesn't occur, this is when progesterone levels do drop in the body. Then the lining itself, which is dependent on that progesterone to maintain itself, loses that support. And then, what ends up happening is these tissues begin to break down. And then we have the introduction of another hormone, prostaglandins. And these are the hormones that help facilitate the body to release, those tissues that our body no longer needed. And then that's released obviously through the cervix and then through the vagina. But, it's very difficult as a lay person to be able to then understand, well, what do I do if, estrogen levels are low or progesterone levels are low or my hormones are fluctuating? What do I do? And so I think this is where Ayurveda gives us a lens into understanding our body from yet a different perspective, where we actually can, without needing to incorporate medicines if we don't need to, pharmaceutical agents, to be able to impact how our body does experience those hormonal fluctuations and therefore the bleed. So Ayurveda looks at the reproductive tissue, right, as actually the last thing that we look at. So, which is absolutely fascinating. And we understand that, the body goes through a process of forming itself through eating food, digestion, and nourishment, that then has a sequential way of how it creates the body. So we're going to go through that because this is going to highlight how each aspect of this is how we can begin to intervene and impact how that reproductive tissue at the end is not only formed, but how we experience what it does. So the first tissue, right, the first thing that we look at after we eat our food and our body digests it, is the first tissue that's formed is related to nutrition. It's the plasma tissue, but it's almost like the liquid nourishment in the body, and it is what helps us to circulate nutrients in our body, and it is the foundational tissue that supports future tissue development. The next tissue is blood. And in that blood tissue, so blood gives us, strength, it gives us vitality, it's what transports oxygen to our body, it gives us warmth, and it also gives nutrients, that's another way in which nutrients are transported throughout our body as well. So from there are a series of tissues that are formed to help build the structure of our body. Okay, and this is the muscle tissue, the fat tissue, the bone tissue, as well as the nervous system tissue, or the bone marrow. And these, like I said, give structure and stability to the body. It helps us with our energy. And this is what gives us the resilience, to withstand certain stressors that we may experience. And it is then from there that the reproductive tissue is built. And of course, this is related to the egg and sperm. It's how, we reproduce. And it's also involved, obviously, in our cycles. And the important thing here, if it isn't clear, right, is that we are going from the food that we eat that's broken down, influenced by first digestion, into its nutrients and building blocks. And those building blocks are used to create our body, which we start from this plasma tissue. And as the body then utilizes this tissue, it is refined and then created into the next one, so on and so forth. So the vitality of our reproductive tissue is absolutely dependent on every upstream, not only process, but also tissues that exist before. And this is why then in Ayurveda, if there is an issue in our, in our menses or our reproductive cycles, or the egg, sperms, whatever it may be, then we don't immediately look at just that aspect. We look at how is your body being nourished? is blood healthy? What are the states of the other, tissues in your body? Because that is it's actually the best way to address, because we are constantly rebuilding our tissues. And so this is the way to be able to do it. Any thoughts?
Viji, something that I was just thinking of for me personally, and like this whole process, my mind also has a direct impact on it. So like when I think about nutrition and digestion, how I interact with my food, or like I find that even during times when I know I'm eating the right things, if I'm too like latched onto that or too stiff around those like eating habits or nutrient habits, then it doesn't necessarily benefit me. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. And I actually am going to talk about that as we move forward. So I might actually keep that as an amazing question for other people to also ponder, because we've got to build. So the first aspect here is to understand, I guess physiologically what is going on. But half the time that I work with people, it's in understanding the other ways in which the energetics that influence the creation of this, rasa, rakta, mamsa, medha, asti, maja, and then finally our reproductive shukra tissues. Because yes, the mind or manas will absolutely impart certain energetics so that, none of this is actually, so if the food itself is going to be supportive in an energetic way, it's just like an equation, 1 + 1, yes, equals 2, but 1 - 1 is then going to equal 0. So there are many factors that influence the production of these tissues. And so this slide is really just talking about the fact that there are, aside from just hormones, which are directly related to the functionality of the reproductive system, there are other aspects that we can look at upstream, and and those are these, as I've mentioned. But then we are absolutely coming to then again what and how and what influences this exact synthesis. So bear with me a little bit. I'm just going to go into then the energetics, and then we can move forward in that. So, and this is actually, it's probably the perfect segue. So again, we intake signal, whatever that may be, impressions, food, etc., into our body, and there's two different things. In the previous slide, we talked about structure, right? So that there's a structural understanding of how our body is created. And so if any which way along that pathway, we either influence it in a positive or negative way, then we effectively then can influence the outcome. In this case, we're talking about the menstrual bleed. Then Ayurveda also understands about energetics. And so when we talk about energetics, and especially in this case related to the menstrual cycle or the bleed, we talk about flow, and flow is then related to movement. So that's where we come into, the energetics of Vata. And Vata, is an energetic force in the body related to movement. There are many different types of movements that exist in our body. And so three main ones we're going to talk about today. So that then when we do get any type of input from externally, that comes in, naturally, the main one through our breath. But Pranavayu not just is about our breath, but the intake of also impression, because there's an intelligence that these energetics, this type of Vata, Pranavayu, has in our body. So with the intake of impressions, input, food, etc., this Pranavayu intelligence is able to recognize it. Then we have the next part of our body, which is going to do what I just talked about, which is the digestion, the absorption, the integration into our body. And then the next aspect of that is then releasing it. So, and that's related to a force called Apanavayu. And this very force is the one, this very energy is the one that is responsible for any downward movement in the body. So whether it be menstruation, elimination, urination, etc. And so this cycle is again about letting go. So Kyla, when you talked about being stuck in a certain way, these are where all of these words that I'm putting on here, we should be able to understand how it impacts us. So whether it be that, we're eating the right food, so we're intaking properly, but then we are also then having difficulty in, letting go or being fixated on something, that very energetic of that thought process can influence and has an action on the other things that we also put in our body. Does that make sense? Did you want me to talk a little bit more about that?
No, this makes complete sense and is exactly what I was wondering about. So thank you.
And so the interesting part of all this is when we then begin to kind of look at this, and as you go deeper, because the truth is, right? So it doesn't matter what any of these, the order matters in a way, right? But then if you think about it, somebody who, may not have access to what these exact words mean because they don't have exposure, the idea more here is to understand that what we intake is processed and then has to be held and then has to be released. That can be related to any one of these things. And in every aspect of our life, we have to be vigilant about how we're doing these, right? So, we're eating the right foods, we're doing the right, yoga asanas, we are monitoring our, when we eat, how we eat, we're not going out and partying all the time, all of that. So we're like, man, I'm doing everything perfect. But that's where every single slide, actually, even before this, talked about how it's not just about 1, 2, or 3 things, but it is about the energetics and what other aspects of our life are bringing in either the same energetics or different energetics that are either helping or disrupting the process. And really one of the biggest diseases that we have is related to the mind, because we don't always give prudence or heedance to the energetics of our thoughts and how that impacts our body. In so many circumstances, I have seen that no herbs are either necessary or needed. No medication is necessary or needed when we start to understand the parts of ourselves that we may not have even been aware of or are buried, who are either, getting all heated up and inflamed or holding on to things or unable to release or release too much. Then healing those aspects of ourselves, because it's the same thing as taking herbs to heal, a biological process. Then we oftentimes see resolution and well-being arise again. So, and again, what I guess I'm trying to share is that the bleeds that we experience are really the outcome of all of these other things that happened beforehand. So, of course, here's the deal. There's no one size fits all. And so every person has their own prakriti or constitution that they're born with. So their bodies are going to function slightly differently. And so what is important for us to understand is a pattern that exists over time. How does my body, show itself, function, over time in cycles. And that's the way that we are going to be able to understand ourselves. And then, we can see if we are either born with some kind of a deviation or deviation occurs. Then we can understand or begin to understand how we can go backwards or, and then resolve that. So typically, though, just for our own, sake to understand, cycle typically lasts from, 26 to 32 days. This is related to that the kind of monthly cycle timeline. Bleeding, is normal anywhere between 3 and 6 days. Usually every other aspect of all of those signals tend to be in the middle range, which is that the flow is steady, it's not too much, not too little. Typically when we see fresh blood, we know that these tissues have built up and then they're being fully released. Body is not holding on to things too much. And so then you'll see a difference in color. We have minimal clots, and it's just blood and some tissue. Pain is either very mild or not there at all. And then, these next two things you may be surprised with. This is the energy level and the mood. This is a very internal process, right? And so it is normal and natural for then our energy and mood to go, I would say, lower in the sense more inward, internal, so that our bodies can be focusing on, what it needs to do and support ourselves. When our energy and our moods or we push our energy and our moods in a different way, then again, like Kyla, you were mentioning, there's this competing phenomenon that's taking place. So this is why it's important. And in so many cultures, there is a focus on, women resting during this time. I genuinely think that particular practice has nothing to do with, male supremacy or anything like that. I mean, it began as a process to support the internal systems and to support the well-being of the woman. Now, how that was turned into something else is not related to biology and supporting our body, but it's just very important that we respect that. So these are why certain practices are recommended, because we are respecting and supporting the processes that are taking place in our body. So whenever there are deviations, then we really should think about the fact that potentially, is our body nourished enough? Are there energetics that are being disturbed, right? And again, with various factors. And then, is my, nervous system feeling unregulated, am I really disturbed? And, do I feel safe over time, or am I overdoing it? So these are just so important to look at. And, whether or not this should be so important for us to kind of pay attention to as not rules, but really to understand that we are then really fully looking at every aspect of how our body functions. And you'll be so surprised when you look at these aspects over time, right? And why do practitioners, everyone comes to me and asks me, okay, well, how long is it going to take for me to get pregnant? How long is it going to take for my cycles to get normal? How long is it going to take? Well, now you understand that, the body just doesn't say, okay, or the bleed doesn't just say, oh, you gave me good food yesterday. You had good thoughts yesterday. You rested yesterday. Well, today your bleed is going to be amazing. It's a reflection of the processes that have taken place over the entire, month previous. Let's move on to the next part, which is utilizing that knowledge that we have, the information that, we know about what is normal and how our body functions, and how do we then look at ourselves and incorporate that knowledge. So it really is here about going back to the basics. So paying attention to our own bleed. That means, again, like I said before, it's looking at cycles and at rhythms. And repetitions, what's going on, what happened. And then also on trying to understand where in your body you need support. So again, is it related to nourishment? Is it related, so what does that mean? So if for example, we don't bleed enough, have we, and later on next time, like, is our luteal phase, like a good number of days where we have enough tissue, right? Because if we have scanty flow, for example, maybe our bodies isn't building. So maybe the nourishment isn't there. And then, if we either are not having, proper flow or there's pain involved, what is is there something going on with the energetics? How can I influence those? And how is my nervous system? Because obviously that is what is going to be signaling to my body what it should do. And then how do we respond to those signals? So when there are these imbalances, Ayurveda, again, tries to understand where in the systemic part, does it need support? So again, if we're looking for nourishment, we're looking at the tissues. If we're looking at the flow, we're looking at those vayus or vata. Then if we're looking at the nervous system, we really want to make sure, like, what are we doing, to maintain that feeling of safety, regulation, stress, etc. So if you experience, depletion, your tissues, are either poor quality in terms of the amount, you're feeling tired, and your bleed itself is, not normal, then the first thing that I would say is you want to look at how strong your digestion is. Are you eating properly, regular meals? Are you eating foods that are going to support you? And typically, warm, nourishing foods are what is going to help balance these energetics of movement in the body. And then also looking at, how we can, what's the status of our blood? And again, you're not going to do this independently, but I think there are signals that you can at least pay attention to, which will help. So related to movement, this is when we experience cramping or clotting, any type of stagnation, mucus, and again, irregular cycles. They come once, they don't come, after that. So this is about supporting your body with gentle circulation that could be through massage, warmth, just even the temperature in our room, and really hear about what are we doing, in terms of the other patterns in our body, and about releasing, holding and releasing. And then we can do things to support that downward moving energy of the body. So in terms of the nervous system, interestingly, right, this is where PMS, all the kind of symptomologies that we experience come from. Again, the nervous system is also related to our experience of pain. And this is directly related to why when we are under stress, our cycles change. And then also related to hormone irregularity. So when people do have those fluctuations, and you can see it through, acne, different things like that, this is where, we will know that we need to support our nervous system. So typically rest, rhythm, right? And feeling safe. And not just keep pushing through and going. So important, because we all do the complete opposite. All right. So from here, what I want to quickly share is that there is a very, very specific reason that I did not mention herbs here, because I want us to be empowered on how to look at this first from a systems and internal perspective before anything. That I think, because if you don't know those things, then all herbs are just going to be shots in the dark. So for all of these, what I wanted to just talk about really quick, and I'm going to just kind of go through these quickly. When we look at digestion as a way of approaching, we want to look at how hungry we are. Do we have a desire for food? Are we able to digest the foods that we eat, right? How often do we eat? These are the things that we want to think about. And the reason why we want to do this is because if we are not effectively nourishing our bodies, then this will show up downstream. So then we want to pay attention then to the signs of the movement, of our cycles, of our bleeds. And, all of these doshas are involved. But what the energetics of our body actually give us is telling us how imbalances in our body are expressing themselves. So if I have inflammation, if I have pain, or if I have stagnation, these are all related to how the state of these energetics exist in our body. And so all of the other things in terms of looking at the signals of our bleed also reflect, these different, the functioning of the body from both a nourishment, movement, nervous system regulation, etc. And then finally, we want to look at the other aspects, because these are really going to be influential as well in how the nervous system reacts and how our body reacts to shape our cycle. Okay, so we look at food, Then we can look at lifestyle and rhythm, the nervous system, and then only herbs and formulations. Because the idea actually is that I believe very much that we need to build the inner physician within, right? Because again, many of you also, have probably gone to, different practitioners. Some, the herbs that they have given you have been good. They've worked. Sometimes they haven't. The idea is that we want to cultivate our own intelligence, because when you build that intelligence, you build the possibility that you yourself in real time can understand what's going on in your body and self-regulate before it gets to the point where things go out of balance. I want to bring in this slide so very quickly to show something important. So we talked about, Divya asked about the seasons in our life, right? And so the first part I talked about is the reproductive years. And I actually just made this slide only to show actually more of this middle section, which is the key qualities. Because I want to show what focus our bodies, are in during this time. And when you look at the qualities, then that is how we are able to support ourselves. So then you match the qualities of support, of any different type of support. And it could be going to somebody, but it also could be the things that we do, the things that we see, the things that we hear, the things that we touch, etc. To match that so we can support ourselves. So in these reproductive years, obviously, because there's so many cycles that are continuously going, there's a fluidity, there's circulation, and there's constant renewal. And so we want to support that energy. And that's where this, the ideas of nourishment, good movement, rhythm, right? And supporting these cycles. So whatever we can do to do these, it doesn't have to be an herb. That's what's very important here. So then the next thing is that when we transition, right? When we're kind of in between the reproductive years and our cycles are changing, the energetics here are about change. And it's about, not being one or the other, but in between. And so oftentimes this is characterized by heat and dryness, both of which vacillate. That's why a lot of women experience hot flashes, things like that. And so this also affects our minds. And so this season of our life should be very much focused on doing the things that support the nervous system. When we are feeling that dryness or that excess heat, bringing in qualities that are cooling. When we experience those qualities of dryness, bringing those qualities of lubrication and nourishment. And so this is what the things that we do, see, feel, touch, etc., should be focused on. And then finally, when we are in menopause, there has to be a shift. Why? Because we're not having those cycles that are being, are also regular, like all of the cycles that we talked about related to the nervous system, the hormonal system, and the reproductive system are having a different kind of conversation. So if they're having a different kind of conversation and it's not as active, we need to be able to support that. So rather than, for example, when we lose our estrogen and progesterone, another option, and I'm not promoting one over the other, but another option to do rather than taking, hormonal supplements is to bring in the qualities of what that estrogen and progesterone do to the body, right? And so I can tell you myself, this is what I do, and it has absolutely worked. When I was in that middle phase, started to get, hot flashes and stuff, and it's when we become aware of that, that's where that awareness comes in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm experiencing this. I don't want to experience this. What's going on? And so then you bring in those qualities, and I can tell you right now, they're gone. So it's another way of really recognizing that we absolutely have the power. We don't always have to depend on others or other things in order to influence us. And so, this is just a parting question so that when we go through life, we begin to start to recognize what things influence us, right? And how things shift when they are influencing us. So, what patterns do you notice when in your cycle or in your life when things feel like, yeah, I'm in the flow and things are supportive? And then what things do you actually see shift when that's not the case? Because that's your number one insight into how to then begin to flip it. So I want to end here. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then just want to spend a little bit of time chatting with you guys. Anybody have any thoughts? I hope that it was helpful. I hope that, yeah. I wanted to say something which was so interesting, because as I was creating this presentation, I was thinking about 3 particular situations that people have come to me for. And all of them have almost always been solved with the same thing. I've had people come to me, like I said, who haven't gotten their period in years. I've had people come to me who have been bleeding for years without stop. And then, you have the in-between where you have, certain cyclical issues. And the idea that always comes up, right, is so whenever people come to me and they're like, okay, just give me something for what I'm going through, I always actually defer to, and I say, and there are a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners here who don't do what I do, and I respect all of you immensely. But it's fascinating, because my experience has been that these very same people, let me just talk about the 2 people, no periods or periods all the time, nonstop bleeding, both of which are troublesome in their own right. And just in general, when people say, just give me something, I always say, well, I'm probably not the right person for you, right? Because what I understand is that, let's say you're taking an herb and those energetics then work itself out. But just like the food that someone intakes, and if the attitude or the mind or the practices around that intake of that food are not synergistic with it, then you're going to be taking herbs and they may or may not stop working because the other energetics overburden even the energetics of the herbs, or we're dependent upon those herbs. And for me, for those 2 cases that I've talked about, we first, before going into any herbs, talked about, what were the patterns. So, for example, in the case of both people or both situations, what are you holding on to, or what are you not letting go? And fascinating enough, because I don't know if any medical journal would report this, but someone who hasn't had their period in several years suddenly gets their period after kind of addressing these things that we talked about today. That doesn't seem like a coincidence. And at the same time, someone who's been bleeding every day, who's tried every possible Western allopathic medicine, suddenly starts to get her period cyclically with rest in between, by addressing these other things and taking very little herbs. How is that possible? So, to me, it's just so powerful that, that Ayurveda gives us this language to understand all of this, and also the tools, including the herbs, to address it. But, it's so important to understand every single part of who we are, so that we can always address the lowest hanging fruit. And sometimes they're buried. And so there's one thing that I don't think I did put. You see, I left out my last slide, and that's that. Let me just quickly share this, because I just went ahead of myself, but very important. It is to cultivate. The journey really does involve cultivating an inner knowing, right? And then using that knowledge to recognize the energetics and how it influences us. But here's the deal of who cares about everything else, prioritizing ourselves, not running ourselves into the ground because we want to either gain knowledge or accomplish things or want things fast, because it's not sustainable. And then implement it, right? Because when we do that, I truly believe that we will have good health. Now I'm really done.
Drop off very quickly, but I will say that I think this has been so informative, and like I said, I wish I had known some of this at least before. But I think I came to you with some issues 1 year ago, and I think you tried to help me understand the different aspects of it in a way that I could implement as without understanding all the mechanics of it. And I think just even now, if I do have a recurrence of that, I just go back to saying that, like you said, right, thinking about maybe is it the food. And I think at some point I was obsessing about the food. Maybe I'm not eating correct, but hey, you know what? I am eating okay. So then what is happening? And then, like you talked about, oh, maybe it's the stress factor, or maybe it's something else. So yeah, I think there's a lot that you gave in this slide. I'm looking forward to the next few sessions, but I definitely would like to go back, think about all of this, and see how to understand things better and keep implementing it. Like you said, it's not just the first season, right? There is the next season to come and the season after that. So I think I'm very happy to have this information from you.
Thank you, Divya. It's never too late. I'm not even in the bleed cycle right now, right? And so it's never too late, because this is relevant even for me, right? It's relevant for all of us. So that's what we have to understand. It's relevant before we get our bleed, it's relevant during our bleed, and it is relevant after our bleed as well. And so we don't want to automatically dismiss all of the things that help us, because not that you're doing that, just in general, like, when you say, oh, well, yeah, stress, but stress, there's a connection between stress and the medical, like the systems of our body and how they function. So, every part of who we are and what we experience is important, and we should revere that. And Divya, before you go off, I just wanted to say, I know you're one person who's always writing to me and saying, okay, I'm going to do khichdi for now 3 days. And I just want to make sure that we all understand, right? I mean, the khichdi, or, any other kind of form of that khichdi is given because why? Because we're understanding that there is a burden on the digestive system that we need to kind of take a step back and support our digestive system, because if that isn't functioning properly, then the rest of our body isn't being created properly, right? And so that's where it's everybody's like, oh, I'm going to go on that cleanse, or I'm going to do, but actually what it is just saying, hey, I respect you, digestive system. I don't know whether, I'm giving you enough of that attention. So I'm going to just lighten your load right now so that you can really get strong. And so then you can help me create the rest of my body in a very, a great way. So that's why I want all of us to always never take what somebody says and just do it. Understand where all of these pieces fall into place, and how, if I or anyone else doesn't give you a suggestion, what can you create? What can you do? What can you use, that will do the same things? Because it's there. I was at a labor the other day, and one thing I noticed is that this particular person, she did not like to be touched. Okay. Most women, a lot of women, I'll put it that way. A lot of women enjoy a touch that supports them. There's different kinds of pressure application in labor that really supports a woman. And I noticed that this person just didn't like it. And it literally discombobulated her. So another thing that I want to also share from the last kind of thing I said was that we all have different ways in which we feel safe. There are all different ways in which we reduce our own stress. My husband always jokes, when I get through my to-do list, I'm happy camper. So for me, yes, getting through, having taking a little bit of time away from either my family or even my other obligations to center myself, write down what I have to do, and actually get through them and do it helps me to regulate my own nervous system. Somebody else, they're like, I want to go to the beach. I don't want to think about it, right? But so everybody is different. And I think that we have to recognize, again, what it is that makes us feel better, and not make excuses or feel bad about it, we should do that, because in the end, when I'm a happier person, then I can interact with every other person from a much better place. And this is really where I think the wisdom of the universe then can be so easily absorbed and then incorporated. Right? Before I meet somebody, before our session, like I really try to ground myself, because that's the only that is the way that I can center myself. So we all have different ways, but yes, it's so important to not undermine ourselves, because we're just amazing. We naturally, you see, in all these cycles, we are only a reflection of truly, really, the divine. We are only a reflection of the divine.
Thank you so much for the session. I think it was enlightening, to say the least, and empowering.
Awesome.
Because we go through so much, and like you said, we undermine the stress. Yeah. But I think it plays a lot of what do I say, part in what we experience as periods and otherwise. So yeah, it's good to be conscious about that. So this is very helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh,
it's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
It was so nice to listen to you, as always.
Yeah, please.
It's just nice to listen, be part of our a common community, which is Ayurveda, and also the doula aspect of Ayurveda. And I love listening to all the things that you said. So I just wanted to listen and not ask. And so it was so beautiful, and a wonderful idea about what you're doing, bringing people together, in creating awareness, much more than just a job. In a way, it's like giving back to the community. I think that's the need of the hour in today's world, very much in need.
Yeah.
That was really, really, really informative, as always, for myself, and also like thinking about clients and working with like specific clients that I have in mind of like how I would start to incorporate this kind of work.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. So thank you.